Thanks for tuning in to episode number 2 of the weekly Ingest, where we discuss the most relevant and recent cybersecurity topics. My name is Jason Firch, and today I'm joined by our resident cybersecurity expert, Joshua Allen. And today we're talking about threats from APT 10 and APT groups in general. Josh, thanks for being here today.
Hey, great to be back here again. Yeah, good topic we're discussing today. A couple new things have come up in the community. There's been some new activity. APTs are always a fun topic, something that I love learning about.
Excellent. Yeah. So I don't know too much about APTs other than they are, state-backed entities that are able to break into, some of the most protected, areas and able to siphon out information, at a city-state level. So this is the first article that we're looking at here, APT 10 active again in multiple regions with new tricks. APT 10, also known as Red Appollo, a Chinese cyber espionage group, is active again and found to be abusing the Windows zero login vulnerability. They are now targeting Japanese companies and subsidiaries belonging to multiple industries, sectors, located in 17 regions worldwide. So from mid-October 2019 to October 2020, the attackers have been running this campaign. So walk me through this here a little bit. What's going on with APT 10 and what's so significant about bringing them up and what's going on with them?
Sure. So first, let's talk a little bit about what they're doing here. So this zero logon exploit's an interesting one. It's a new CVE 2020-1472. This one has to do with Windows login initialization vector. So this is getting down into some kind of complex parts of how these systems work, but this is an address that should be a random number, and it's set to all zeros in this flaw if you have this flaw. And what that means is you can just essentially log in to the system. Simple way to gain authentication. It's got a 10 out of 10 risk score because, obviously it's do full system takeover with this kind of thing. It's a cryptographic flaw that's actually in Microsoft's Active Directory Net Logon Remote Protocol, typical mouthful of Microsoft protocols. So if the servers are using NTLM, NT-LAN Manager, they can attack it through this vector. So there's some specific things that need to be set up for this to work, but it's common enough that APT 10 is going after it. So this information comes out of some research primarily by FireEye, as well as numerous other threat research industries out there. U.S. Cyber Command as well, CERT. Everybody's watching all these APT groups, but FireEye is a really great go-to spot for APT information. They've got an easy to digest APT information page out there. A lot of people refer to them as kind of one of the authorities there. So
yeah, you were showing me this earlier, this threat research page here. Is this it? You were showing me one earlier where it's basically it's a continuous update of the latest threats that are coming out. They update it real time, right?
Yeah, they've got quite a few things here, and they're part of Mandiant, who most people are familiar with. Mandiant. It's part of the CTI, the Cyber Threat Intelligence community. Big researchers. Okay. But anyway, back to APT and what they're doing. So they're exploiting servers through this zero logon flaw, which is a new flaw. So a lot of people have not had a chance to patch it yet, and most likely it's been a 0 day for a long time because these are not really new Microsoft protocols that they're abusing. APT 10's been around for a while, since I think 2009, so 11 years. Their activities off and on, as is pretty common with all these APT groups. Some of the stuff they've been known for in the past They attacked the Norwegian MSP Insect Group in, what was it, 2018? Between November 2017 and September 2018. It's probably one of the most recent things that they've done.
Have they just been dormant recently? Is that why this is being highlighted as like they're active again?
No, to be honest, I think it's just because of the targets. APT-10 has been attacking Japan a lot in the time in between, these reports that we get. So I think what we're seeing is we're just seeing the shifting attack, like they're moving attack surfaces from. It kind of sweeps the globe. They attacked some U.S. companies. They moved into the United Kingdom and Belgium, moved back over into Japan, and you can see it's. So I think it's what we're just seeing is over. These are advanced persistent threats, right? So these campaigns they pull off are years in the making and years going in time, and sometimes forever. We heard about them in 2009. There are probably systems that remain compromised. That's very likely, if not by these guys, by any of the number of other APT groups that are out there. So no, I don't think they've been dormant. I think they've just been somewhere else for a little while.
probably not getting caught, right? That's their whole jam, right? Yeah. Okay.
Well, and that's what makes APTs unique is we hear about more and more. We hear about hackers getting caught, especially gangs, cyber gangs. I'm sure you've heard or seen the word cyber gangs in the news, right? And that's not really what an APT is. A cyber gang, and they use the term differently because it's kind of meant to talk about the sophistication, right? A cyber gang is a bunch of punk kids getting together hacking something, right? Or it's an organized crime unit, but one that's not necessarily advanced nor has the resources to pull off some of these very, very sophisticated attacks in these systems. One of the main things that sets APTs apart is their ability to engineer or find and purchase, depending on what they're doing and who they are, 0 days. 0 days is a big part of it. The whole Eternal Blue class of attacks and vulnerabilities that have been out and highly publicized for a while came from the Shadow Brokers leak of NSA tools. So that's the part we got to kind of talk about there is the NSA developed these tools, most likely. It's possible they purchased them from some other group, but the NSA has a lot of money behind them and they have a lot of really, really talented people working there. I mean, I cannot stress how enough. Those are some of the smartest people working there in the industry. Not just there, but man, they have very very high standards now for hiring people in there for these advanced cybersecurity jobs.
So, I guess my question is, what can you do about this, about an APT? Because it's always been my understanding that if someone has the resources, which an APT does, and going back to what you were saying, like a group of individuals that are, maybe they're just trying to DDoS classic WoW that happened last year, and I think all of those people ended up getting caught. Versus an APT, which is literally it's a state entity, it's a government. What do you do about that?
Well, so I do want to clarify something here. APTs aren't necessarily a state government, and usually they're not. Usually, with these kinds of activities, any kind of state governments aren't taking that direct of involvement in what's going on. So what they're actually doing is they're backing a lot of these groups, these sophisticated groups.
I see.
So, and it depends on where they are too. So some of these ones we know about in Russia, they kind of live in this like fringe space where, it's you can do whatever you want as long as you're not affecting Russian interests in a negative way, and you can get funding for your.
They turn a blind eye.
right?
Turn
And
a
every
blind
now and
eye,
then, right.
progress our cause.
Sure. Well, and every now and then, the other understanding is, and sometimes you're going to be asked to do specific things, and you will do them, right? Because it's Russia.
Yeah, you will do them.
um,
Yeah.
and just to be clear, it's not just Russia; it's everyone. I mean, the U.S. has this now. I don't think that we're sponsoring groups. I think the U.S. is one of the states that does directly get involved via the government. We heard a lot about the NSA's activity, the CIA's activity. We know that these groups definitely engage in these kinds of activities. I mean, it is where the new war is being fought. So, of course, the government's there, and not just to attack, but obviously mostly to defend. I mean, to be honest, we've been on the defensive for a very long time before the NSA's activities, as well as the CIA's and other groups' activities, ramped up and got really focused. In the last, really in the last decade, our cyber command, just in general, from over America. I don't mean just the U.S. Army Cyber Command, just all of that cyber stuff we have is really taken a huge leap. You can see the efforts that went into it. We've got some great facilities. We have some awesome research going out. The government's bodies like U.S. CERT, Cyber Command, DISA, they're putting out a lot of great information to help out the community because they have all this research and they have a lot of resources to do it. So it's a give and take.
It's almost like Sorry, I was just going to say it's almost like the next arms race, because I'll have to find the resource on this, and to get the right stat here, and I'll share that in the show notes. But I think I read somewhere that China was investing in 200,000 people per year, sending them overseas to get an education in cybersecurity and bringing them back for that specific purpose to help build that resource. And I think it's probably a wide practice across other countries. Certainly, the U.S. probably has some programs in there, or maybe even Israel or some other countries.
So, and I mean, really, I like to say it's the new Cold War, but I was thinking about that this morning, and the reality is it's not the new Cold War. The Cold War never ended. Is the reality? The F-22 that's flying around the sky today got its budget approved to build that in 1986. It took them a long time to get to this point, but just that lag time is pretty long there. So this is not really anything new. It's just that we've moved on a little bit from focusing on missiles and ICBMs and jets, even though we're still building and producing those things. But the cyber war is where this has gone, and it's already cost multiple nations trillions of dollars globally. The United States, you can't even measure it. If you look at what's the damage that's been caused to the government, both in theft and attacks, as well as in the private sector. There's tons of companies out there that have been compromised by these APT groups who are pulling blueprints, proprietary data, software out of them and trying to steal it, get it to market, make their own, usually ahead of time. And that causes
there's economic implications.
Yeah, and you can't even measure that. Like you couldn't say how much damage was caused by them stealing that and getting ahead forever. It's like infinite money, right?
Other than to say it was a lot. Yeah, no. Yeah, it's what is the loss potential? What is the future value if you had been able to produce that product or whatever the case might be? Yeah, no, that's a pretty big deal.
So real quick, let's I wanted to get back on APT a little bit. Just kind of go to, we talked a little bit about who they are and what they do. I want to cover a couple quick things on some of the what's in terms of tools. What are these guys actually doing? What are they using? What do we want to look out for? Now, first of all, most people don't need to worry about APT as in single entities. They're the main thing that's going to happen to them is they're going to get hit with a tool that was probably developed by an APT, but being used by some other person out there. APTs are expensive to run, so their targets are going to be expensive targets, first of all. So risk analysis is a big part of it. Are you an APT threat, yes or no? So, don't blow your budget on everything. Don't live in a bunker with all this craziness because you're scared of APT if you're not an APT target. Now that we get that out of the way, what do you do about it? Well, you need to have a very robust and serious cybersecurity program from top to bottom. There's no one way to stop APT, and there's no real stopping APT. Most of the stuff is reactive. The best you can do is put up preventative and reactive measures. And what I mean by that is, well, defense in depth, everything. Compensating controls is a big part of it as well. So you need to have a patching program, a scanning program so that you know about these vulnerabilities when they get published. Now, I said in all likelihood this was a 0 day and they knew about it beforehand. What can you do about that? Well, that's where your other tools come into play. Make sure that you've got good administrative controls. Always be auditing those. Make sure that your systems are on, updated, recent versions where possible. Don't use outdated Microsoft systems. Have malware protection, runtime protection, something like Carbon Black Protect, for example. Then also make sure you're doing your testing of all these controls. So spend the money, buy the controls, put them in place, but they're going to be useless if you don't actually implement them right. If you install a lock backwards on your door, that's not going to be very helpful. Make sure that you've got them in place, and that means testing, pen testing. Have somebody actually come in and try to attack them. Do all of it, and you have to maintain it, and you have to keep updating it year over year, month over month, like all the time, weekly, daily, hourly. Which is why a lot of big companies end up with a SOC. A SOC is a good defense against APT because they've usually got threat intel. They have all kinds of IDSs, IPSs, a lot of experts.
So hold on, Josh. You're throwing around a lot of acronyms just so people that may not be familiar. SOC is a Security Operations Center.
Yep.
IDS is an intrusion detection system. IPS, intrusion prevention system. Just wanted to throw that out there. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
I get in the zone, So,
yeah, no.
Stuff we're throwing around all the time. So that's all to say that if you want to defend against APT, you just need to be very serious about security. And if you want to be serious about security, even if you're not an APT target, then you need to kind of understand risk analysis and business analysis and making sure that what you're doing makes sense for what you stand to lose. If you spend too much money on your cybersecurity tools and you don't, make enough money to pay for them, that's a bad business model. So it's complicated.
And to your point earlier, it's a bad business model to or practice rather to invest in all of these tools, but then not stress test them. Like going back to what you were saying about penetration testing, but yes. I think you bring out a much broader topic that I'd love to cover potentially in another episode. Is this idea of continuous testing, continuous monitoring, and not just for APTs,
Absolutely.
But I think it's starting to move into smaller organizations as well, where there's this need to respond immediately to threats. It's not let's just wait and see what happens. Let's run a vulnerability scan once a quarter. And that we're good. We pen tested once a year. We're good.
Making me cringe over here, man.
What happened to the other 11 months, right? Yeah.
Right.
So those are really great points to bring out.
You mentioned something really interesting about the small and medium businesses. Those are more and more vulnerable these days because big companies have been able to invest in these really expensive advanced tools. What you're talking about with continuous testing, there's a company out there, Synac. They're one of multiple companies that do that. Like pen testing as a service. You subscribe to them and throughout the entire engagement. Somebody is continuously going against all your systems that are out there. But that's pretty expensive. Smaller businesses can't pay for that kind of thing.
Right.
APT groups and just malicious actors in general have realized that. It is a lot harder to break into a bank these days than it used to be. It used to be very easy, so I'm sorry to say, but it's almost impossible now. Some of the bank security is better than the government security in certain areas, which I find pretty amazing because that was a very quick leap there. So what do you do? Well,
they had a
now
lot
you
to
go.
lose. I mean, I think the average, again, I will have to find this stat. I think the average amount of money spent by the larger banks in cybersecurity is somewhere in the realm of $500 million a year.
Wow.
$500 million a year.
Yeah.
They have a lot to lose, right?
You have
a lot of regulation.
And it costs a lot of money to attack that. That's the thing too. That's hard to attack.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but what you can do, because everything is electronic these days, is you can get on the poorly secured IoT device down at the donut shop and read all the credit cards that go through. That's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with now. It's the shift in dynamic that I've seen is these smaller targets that have larger attack surfaces than they used to. That's the other thing is a lot of shops, Square Reader, stuff like that. Think about any little shops you've been to where it would have been a cash-only mom and pop shop, or maybe they had the old like swipey credit card reader back in the day. But now you can actually, beep or chip in, but they're using an iPad, right, with some kind of app on there. Those are the kinds of things that people want to target now, either through a wider protocol attack across the whole widecast network, or sorry, internet, or regional targeted areas because they probably live down the street or something.
Yeah, point of sale systems are point of sale systems. Yeah,
Yep.
POSs are
they're POSs
targets because you were talking about make sure that your patches are up to date and everything. Like, how often do you patch that?
And sometimes the question is, can you, especially with like kiosk type systems, these things that are used maybe not necessarily for point of sale, but for things like here's a good example: power cards at a casino, where you go in there. Most casinos now you use a card instead of cash, and you go swipe. It's just like Dave and Buster's. You go swipe it, and you put your $3,000 on your card there, and you go lose it in the machines. That thing is a kiosk, and most likely that's not directly owned by the casino. It's some vendor. There aren't too many vendors that are out there, and there was a pretty big news story not that long ago about some interesting business with the FBI. We'll talk about that one. I'll send you a link about that. It's pretty cool. But anyway, you don't own that. So even if you, as the casino owner, have an IT department who's updating everything, you actually can't patch the OS on that kiosk because it's using a proprietary Windows XP version that the vendor has to push patches for. So that's your weak link right there. Stuff like that.
Yeah, the what is that? The counterparty risk. Right.
Yeah. And so that's where your third-party vendor assessments become important, which is another thing you can do against APT groups. It's at every level of business, no matter what you're doing, you have to think about the security implications and think, does this make me more vulnerable? Does this increase my threat surface, my attack surface?
Yeah, just having that mindset puts you leaps and bounds ahead of others in terms of building out secure systems. Okay, so APT 10. Anything else here before we jump into the next article that you wanted to cover?
I don't think so specifically on this. Let's give them a name. MenuPass seems to be the most popular name given to him. I saw some other articles calling him Cicada, which I hadn't seen repeated, but it's interesting. I always
this one calls them Red Appollo.
So
Yeah,
an
and I
interesting
think
thing about them is back in July of 2018, there
Mhm.
was some activity targeting the Japanese media sector. They actually sent some phishing emails out to a whole bunch of companies with things like invitation to lecture, government recommendations from the Liberal Democratic Party's Comprehensive Strategic Maritime Subcommittee. Ooh, that sounds official. North Korean interior swayed by approach of the United States. Ooh, that sounds inflammatory, right? So typical phishing kind of campaign. But these all got set out, and I can't read these because they're in Japanese here. But they sent them to these Japanese companies, and that's a really important thing to talk about too. Just real quick, one final thing on APT is how do they usually get in and get inside your network to be able to exploit these old things? Because most people have good perimeter security these days. Phishing. As soon as one of your people clicks that malicious link and they get their installer to get a rat or a backdoor in there that is using a 0-day exploit, you are
a
done.
rat is a remote access Trojan. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, I'm going to have to get better at that.
No, it's all good. It's all good. But I think your point's really, really critical. Say that again.
So the main way that they are able to get in and exploit these vulnerable systems is through social engineering, usually phishing. So it doesn't matter how good your perimeter security is. If you download that installer and it's able to run, you're in trouble. And most of the time, those things from these APT groups are using a custom built through reverse engineering exploit that your tools do not detect yet.
Wow. So they'll be in your system for who knows how long before you even recognize that they've gotten out with what they want.
Well, it shouldn't be too long if you're doing threat hunting every single day. So
more costs, right? Yeah,
right.
more, yeah, whatever you can do, right? The defense in depth approach, yep. But again, the cost.
You got to be watching those packets. You can see them moving around. If you're watching your data and you see it exfiltrating, you really got to watch data exfil. That's the big thing right there. So if you have good data exfil, you can catch it. You can close down what's going on. That's the main thing, is catching them. Once you see their activity, you can start to put the pieces together of what IPs, what methodologies, and you can go in and start trying to react to them.
It's interesting. It's almost like you're investigating it.
You are. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So let's move on to this other article that you sent me. APT groups. APT groups finding success with mix of old and new tools. Ooh.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this, but this kind of goes into some more depth here with a couple of the specific tools and groups.
Okay.
Now these groups don't have an APT number as far as I could tell. I might be wrong about that. If somebody wants to correct me, feel free to.
Well, let's read through this real quick here. Or at least a portion of this, and then we can get your thoughts. The APT threat landscape is a mixed bag of tried and true tactics and cutting edge technologies, largely supercharged by politics, and report finds. So this comes from Kaspersky. APT groups continue to use the fog of intense geopolitics to supercharge their campaigns, but beyond these themes, actors are developing individual signature tactics for success. That's according to Kaspersky's most recent APT trends report of Q3 2020, which found that some groups are innovating and pushing technical boundaries, while others are taking a more low-tech approach, honing messaging around COVID, the elections, and other headlines. Yeah, the definitely has been persistent with everything that's gone on this year. I think cybercrime's definitely been a lucrative industry to be in.
Well, according to PurpleSec stats page, it's up 600%, and that was a little while ago, so it may even be higher now. That was, I think, a summer stat.
Yeah, and I remember very specifically when everything started up, I was getting emails from people that said that they could sell me masks and other protective equipment, and it's like, no, I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, we had some employees at work got these emails where like here's your check from some society for your contributions and helping out with the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to get someone. So what really catches my eye with this article, and I'll hand this off to you, is the mix of old tools. The new stuff is interesting because you're always innovating, but it's, to me, when someone says that they're using an older method or an older tool, that just tells me that people just aren't keeping up with the times. They're not patching their systems. They're not implementing security. They're not taking it seriously, and they're like you were saying earlier, the smaller shops that are more susceptible and not able to spend $500 million a year on security, they're very easy targets for not just APTs, but the average malicious user, the script kiddies out there.
Yep. Well, and bottom line, and I'm gonna just be super blunt about it, it's because people are failing to update their systems. And now, to kind of play a little bit of devil's advocate, there's a number of reasons why you may not be able to update them at the speed that would be prudent or that you might want to. But it's just something that the industry needs to push. Is we need to stop having these roadblocks in companies to updating. Roadblocks like, well, it might affect the developers, or well, these guys need SMB v1 to still be working because of this old piece of junk 2008 server that's still alive, and this old network over there that has a Citrix connection on it that they VPN to from France. Like, what the hell is going on?
And there's only one person that knows how to run that entire system.
Right. Yeah, who owns this, first of all, and what is going on? And that person's, hopefully that person is a sysadmin. A lot of companies I've learned over the years actually don't require you to be a sysadmin to, quote, own a server in terms of inventory. And what's a really weird thing to happen is you own it for inventory because it's your budget, it's your shop, right? So suddenly you're the owner of it, but you may not be a technical person like that necessarily. You're just responsible for it, which is kind of unfair, because then when the IT person comes in, they're like, dude, what are you doing? You got to do all this. And you're like, I don't know, Yeah. So the problem, and what we're seeing right there, is that failure to shift all the way left, like I talked about on last episode. And like I said earlier, of getting that security thought process throughout the entire business process, right? If somebody's going to be responsible physically and financially and whatever for an information system, they need to have some kind of basic understanding of cybersecurity. It doesn't have to be that much. They just need to understand why it's important to patch, why it's important to get these things tested, why you need them to be scanned, and a little bit of how. They don't need to be technicians, but they at least need to understand, okay, I got to make sure that these agents are always running when this thing's online so that the IT guys can scan this, because I don't want this to get hacked. That's all you need that person to understand day to day. It's not really that much, right?
So, it's really interesting. I just had a random thought pop into my head about, how do you get people to actually care about security in an organization? And I know for at least companies that I've worked for, it's always been handed off to HR as like a training module or something like that. Yep. Maybe in some cases it's like an MSP or something that's a vendor or something that you're working with, but it's generally HR who's overseeing some of these policies and implementing them for larger organizations. And then occasionally, maybe once a year, twice a year, especially during the, this time of year is more, there's a, just seasonality wise, there's a higher uptick in phishing emails, where, you'll get an email from the IT team that just says, hey, just as a reminder, make sure you be aware of these things. And to me, it's like, is that enough? or should there be like a security czar who's not like assigned to an organization, who's not just, they're not part of the security team per se, but they work in interface with them, but they bring all of that knowledge to the group as a whole and really become an advocate for the company to push this. Someone internally who can actually drive some of these things. I don't know if that's something that exists or if that's the right approach, but I feel like in some cases it would be nice to just have someone who's constantly there reminding you of these things, not from always the bad perspective of things, because it can kind of get very heavy when you're always talking about threats and risks and all of that. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that random tangent?
I think that's very interesting. I've never seen anything like that tried before, having like a security advocate built into all these groups. What I have seen be effective is two things, and these are kind of common and natural things. One is people who already come from a security area or a department, or just have an interest in it and have that background, right? And then they move into somewhere else and they bring that knowledge with them, right? That's a good person to have in there, but that doesn't happen super often, and it's kind of just like a gamble. The other person is somebody who doesn't come from that background, but cares about being secure, cares about it like any other business aspect. And I'm starting to see that more and more, which is really refreshing. Like it's starting to be almost the same discussion as the money discussion, right? When they come talking about whatever new thing they're doing, they're like, okay, well, is this cost effective, blah blah blah, and also, is this safe, is this secure too? Do we, are we sending these guys our files? I've heard people ask that. It's kind of sounds like a parroted thing, but at least it gets the discussion going, because they always ask it the same way. Are we sending these guys our files? That's exactly how I've heard it said like 8 times. I don't know what presentation or training or something it came out of, but I love it. It's a great question. I'm like, thank you. That's actually a question that everyone should be asking is, what am I sending this person entity? You can't even say person. It's not a person. It's just a computer gobbling up your information. What are you sending it, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we sort of derailed a little bit from the APT conversation, but not too much. I think it's very related, especially in the context of social engineering. I want to get back to this though, because that is. So walk me through this one. What did you find interesting with this article?
Well, let's scroll down a little bit so that Death Stalker is just at the top there, so we can kind of see all this information.
Okay, so Death Stalker, the report said, has been successful using the same tactics. Oh, so Death Stalker is the APT group. Okay.
It is. So it's a Kaspersky
target log firm
named APT group. I
see.
Yep.
The group's interest in gathering sensitive business information leads us to believe that Death Stalker is a group of mercenaries offering, funny word to use there, but okay, offering hacking for hire services. Interesting. For acting as an information broker in financial circles. Yeah, you talk about ransomware as a service. Now you're talking about hacking as a service.
Hacking for hire has been around a very long time. Nothing really new. So hold on a second right here. So this last sentence in that one. The activities of this threat actor first come to our attention through a PowerShell-based implant called PowerSync. PowerShell is neglected in so many ways. One, because people are too scared of it to use it, and PowerShell is awesome. Use PowerShell. 2, don't use PowerShell because it's super powerful, and if you don't know what you're doing, you don't actually know how to, use it while also keeping it secure. Some people are PowerShell gurus, and if your organization has a PowerShell guru, please take that guy's knowledge. But most of the time, PowerShell doesn't need to be accessible to anybody except for service accounts. Not even admin accounts need PowerShell access unless there's some, within reason. There could be organizations that are doing certain things and they know what they're doing, and that's fine. But in general, if you don't have a guy whose job it is to be in the terminal every day doing something, then there's probably no reason that you have PowerShell accessible from anything other than some application services that might need it. So, and my point in all that kind of rambling there, ranting rather, is that these kinds of exploits are fairly common. Even the way back with the Eternal Champion, PS exec, PowerShell execute, right? This one's called PowerSync, but it's still kind of, I'm not gonna say it's the same thing. It's using the same technology. Let me see if I can find a cool little thing here. It's effectively just a bunch of scripting in PowerShell that calls up any number of things. You could install rats with it, remote access Trojans, right? Backdoors, all kinds of things. You can execute code. PowerShell is extremely powerful. So this PowerSync thing, it's got some base 64 encoded stuff in there. They create a VBE file, which is a Visual Basic Executable file. Super old type of Microsoft file, but also still in use and plenty powerful. So it creates a decoy PDF document. That document has chunks of code written within there, and that's got the PowerShell code. So it actually then assembles that. It's called chunking. There's another term for it that's escaping me right now for this type of attack, but you basically feed it in pieces at a time. And that's a way to circumvent systems that are looking for complete commands being passed at a time. It just looks like, a couple letters, couple symbols, no big deal. And then
I see.
Actually all
okay,
loaded up
so it's able to subvert
yes.
that. Okay.
Yep. There are tools that detect that too. It's always a back and forth.
The chunking mechanism is what you're saying. There are tools that detect that aspect. Okay.
Yep. So
okay.
What happens is basically it's some URLs get hard coded into some areas in here, and so what you end up getting is looks like a keyboard reader. There's some kind of weird WordPress site in here. Interesting. So you can do all kinds of things, but it's the whole point of it is to try to get the system to install some stuff through PowerShell script via a forged PDF. And so the question is, how does that get on your system? The answer lies in the PDF, right? It's a phishing email. You clicked it, you download the PDF, now you have malware.
That's all it takes.
Yep. The other one they'd used here is EvilNum, which is EvilNum's actually a framework. It's not a specific. It's not like one tool. It does a few things. Ooh, Python.
Well, this is the link to EvilNum. I was just EvilNum APT has added the okay. I see.
Another one. So this is a really popular thing with Chinese groups. Most of what I've seen coming out of these groups in terms of malware, like the whole point is to gain remote access. APT 10.
Right, because once you once you have access to everything, right? You can do the exfiltration of the data, you can lock out users, you can do anything, right?
Look, if you want to have some fun, it's kind of scary too, but if you ever have some time to mess around in a little virtual lab environment, use a rat. Install one on a system and use it. One time I was messing around with Dark Comet, which was an older kind of popular one, and it was just terrifying. It's amazing how easy they make this. So like once the rat is up and set up and you are logged in, you see the person's screen just as if you're a remote admin, and they cannot tell. And there's a nice little toolbar on the side that has all these cool tools with their own custom icons even. Somebody went to a little too much effort over there to make the UI all pretty. And that's the thing is, it's not like it's a bunch of dudes pounding away on the keyboard like they show in the movies. These are dudes sitting back, chilling, eating chips, just clicking buttons, and this thing had it had so many tools. You could get a whole mem dump, you could just take a screenshot, you could record, you could anything you wanted, man. You could take over all kinds of stuff. So these rats are super powerful.
I bet like a non-technical person could probably teach themselves how to set this stuff up. Like setting up a virtual environment, very easy to do, free. getting all of these tool sets out there. I mean, it's got to be ridiculously easy to do this. And as long, if you have, you know, the persistence and the patience to learn, you could probably spin this up relatively quickly these days. It's not like, to your point, like people are just clicking buttons. The malware's already been created. Once you've created that program, it's just a matter of deploying it in these campaigns and just finding people who are susceptible to these attacks. So it's very interesting that the remote access Trojans are the preferred method, I guess, would you say?
Yeah, I guess so.
Or
just
a
because
preferred
there's,
method?
I'd say they're preferred because you just see them so much, and I think it's just because they're so powerful. Once you get one, like I said, it's that easy. You're just clicking around. So this EvilNum thing, I don't know why they're calling it an APT in some instances. It's not. I don't know. Maybe it is a group. To me, I think it's just a framework, and maybe they've just ended up naming them both after each other. But this one's really cool because it's another rat. But the way that they get this is it can be through a PDF, but it can also be through a picture of a credit card or a driver's license. But what they've done is they've modified the number on it so that it has, how does this work exactly? It's kind of interesting. So something about the number of it, I'm trying to read this here. It's a JavaScript file. Can't find it. There's a lot in here, and I haven't really read this deep into it, but it's a spear phishing email. First, it's directly targeted, right? So what it ends up doing is they get a zip file that has some other stuff in there, as well as a picture of a number or another PDF, you know, that has a number and some code in it. And there's a little JavaScript component in there. That JavaScript component can call back to a command and control server, a CNC server. Using, and so let's like assemble together using the link files, using these evil numbers. Once it calls to the CNC server, it's able to install a little C# component, which calls to another CNC or the same CNC server, another little component out there. And then it builds itself a little virtualized server. It's got some components in there that can like call out. It gets some reverse shell, opens some FTP servers, can do some proxies. It's really advanced. Like it breaks into this whole little ecosystem.
Well, yeah, I mean, it constructs its own virtual server within your environment. You have no idea it exists.
You should have some idea it exists. That's the thing is, if you are watching, you should be noticing these kinds of things. First of all, you should be catching those CNC callouts. If you're not watching your traffic callouts as well as what's coming into your network, you're half blind. You only have one eye. Because that's where you stop it right there. That's a lot higher up in the cyber kill chain, is getting that command and control. If you can block it at command and control, that's a really, really good time to block it. Because really after that,
nullify most of those attacks, right?
That's kind of the point of no return, is like once it's able to call out and then get anything from there is the other part of it. You know, if you can block it from sending anything, then you're good. But once it sends a package, ooh man, trouble is coming your way.
Yeah.
Man, so this thing does all kinds of stuff. It's pretty crazy though. They're super advanced, and that's the other thing that's really neat to these APT groups is these guys are actually they're developers, they're reverse engineers, they're extremely intelligent individuals on these teams, and they're building these crazy complex tools which take a lot of time and energy to build. So that's what kind of differentiates them from the script kiddies who can just run something out of Kali Linux, right?
Yeah, they just go buy a ransomware kit for $30 or something, and then just start trying to fish people into it. Yeah, so that's Deathstalker. Anything else on them that you want to touch on before we move on?
No, that covers them, I think.
Okay, so Mosaic Reflexor. In early October, Kaspersky researchers reported the discovery of rogue UEFI firmware images modified to deliver malware, which the team dubbed Mosaic Reflexor as part of a wider framework. Components of the Mosaic Reflexor framework excuse me, was part of attacks launched against oh man, I'm having trouble reading today, against diplomats and African, Asian, and European non-government organizations and traced back to Korea. The specification that constitutes the structure and operation of low-level platform firmware, including the loading of the operating system itself. It can also be used when the OS is already up and running. For example, in order to update the firmware, so what's going through here with Mosaic Regressor?
This was pretty jargony, so let's break that down a little bit. It was kind of a mouthful, so I'm not surprised you struggled with it. There's a lot of stuff going on in that. So what they're saying is happening here is this Mosaic Regressor group is using tainted UEFI firmware images to deliver malware. UEFI can be thought of as the new BIOS, right? It replaces legacy BIOS, and it's got a lot more stuff. So legacy BIOS, you know, here's the main thing I can kind of tell you is different here. So you remember back in the day, you had to like press delete or F2, get into your BIOS, set which thing was your, you know, the master and the slave device and all that kind of stuff, right? That's classic
Set your
BIOS.
boot orders,
Right.
or you could like increase your fan speeds if you wanted to overclock back in the day. Yeah.
So UEFI retains all that stuff, but it does it a little bit differently. You generally don't have to go mess around with the boot order anymore. It's got some smart stuff built in there, so it should be able to automatically do it. I haven't accessed my BIOS in forever. I used to access it all the time, but UEFI is a lot smarter. It handles the firmware, it handles the boot, it handles a lot of stuff. You know, it's kind of pushed up into what master boot record for Windows does as well. So that has changed. MBR is not what it used to be anymore, and this new UEFI thing's taken over. It's pretty cool stuff, but it's very powerful, and with, you know, that means it's a great opportunity for exploits. So what these guys are doing is they're creating malicious firmware images, and those malicious firmware images are actually going to install the tools needed at the BIOS level, at the board firmware level. So before you even get to Windows booting, which has all of your security tools, this stuff is running. This stuff is giving them the access, which is super cool, I think. It's terrifying, but it's really cool.
Terrifying, but cool. Yes.
It is. I mean, it is. A lot of this stuff is like, wow.
I think so. Yeah, but I mean, you can't. I guess you can't be scared of technology all the time, right? Like you can't be in that. You should be aware of the implications, but you shouldn't be terrified of them.
Yep. So these things, and with these UEFI, with these BIOS level, chip level attacks, they can do things like create their own custom drivers, and the drivers might just really be malware running, but it looks like a driver to your system, so it doesn't think otherwise. They can access so this one particularly looks like it's designed to access files. It's got a lot of NTFS specific things, which is, you know, the Windows file system. And so with that information and knowing that they're targeting NGOs in Africa, Asia, and Europe, I think we can kind of put together what their target is here. Is they're trying to spy on what these guys are doing out there, you know, trying to steal files.
Yeah, and just want to read this last bit here. Overall, what this means for cybersecurity specialists is that defenders need to invest resources in hunting malicious activity in new, possibly legitimate environments that were scrutinized less in the past.
So that's kind of what we were talking about when we started, right? Oh, sorry, I didn't talk over.
Yeah, I just want to finish this bit out here. That includes malware that is written in lesser-known programming languages, as well as through legitimate cloud services. Tracking actors' activity and TTPs allow us to follow as they adapt new techniques and tools, and thereby prepare ourselves to react to new attacks in time. Great. Any last thoughts on this article or APTs in general, what we covered today, Josh?
No, just to kind of reiterate what we talked about at the beginning as well as at the end of that article there is what what organizations and businesses and progressively smaller businesses need to be doing is taking security more seriously. Is really the bottom line. But
Yeah.
that threat hunting there, threat hunting is huge. Looking for indicators of compromise is how do you find APTs. You know, you're not typically going to be finding them with your high level anti-malware and all that kind of stuff. You're gonna have to look because they're doing things that are not on the radar yet. So you're gonna have to look for activity rather than signatures, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think this goes back to investigation. You have to have a person who's putting all of the pieces of the puzzle together,
Absolutely.
and then creating, and then being able to, show that work, and then being able to act on it are two different things. But that's the first part of it.
Well, that's incident response.
Software,
Yep.
exactly. But but relying on a software and saying you're safe and secure. I bought the software; it's going to protect me. I mean, that's lax. You're not really taking security seriously.
No, I mean software's not going to do anything other than support you. Software is a tool. Software is not the thing. You're if you have to Splunk and you're just taking everything in, that's just a bucket. You need somebody to actually look at that bucket. Otherwise, it's just a bucket full of stuff, and it's not doing anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, Josh. Well, thank you as always for being on this show and lending your expertise. I think there's a lot of really great information that we covered today, and some topics that I think we can discuss in the future. Any final thoughts? You good there?
No, I think it was great today. This is awesome. Hopefully these are going to get ever better as we go on, and we can figure out our pace a little bit more. But I love this, man. This is good stuff, and I'd love to talk more about what we can do against some of these things. So I'd like to talk about next time some more threats, but then we should open up some more topics, maybe a separate series on how to defend against some of this stuff.